All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to How to Stay Informed this election season. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. We're going to give people a chance to sign into the webinar, but we'd love to get a feel for where you all are coming from and how you got to know about She Should Run. So if you'll go over to the chat, you can access the chat by going to the bottom of your screen and hitting the chat icon and making sure it says to all panelists and attendees in the to section. We'd love to know your name, where you're from, and how you heard about today's session. So if you will go ahead and type those into the chat, we'll get to know you a little bit. We'll get started with today's session in just a few minutes. Hi, Krista. Good to see you. Excellent. Getting some people from youth to the people. Excellent. Wonderful to have you here. Again, for those who are just signing in, we're going to give it just a couple minutes to let people get on to the session. In the chat, if you go to the bottom panel of your Zoom screen, you'll see a chat icon. And if you make sure that the to line says to all panelists and attendees, we'd love to see where you're joining us from and how you heard about this webinar today. We'll get started in just a minute or two. So it looks like we have people from Long Beach, from Pittsburgh, from Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and hearing about us through a variety of channels. So grateful to have you all here today. We're excited to be able to learn together. We'll get started again just in a few minutes. For those of you who are still just logging on, if you can go to the chat icon, it's at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and make sure the to line says to all panelists and attendees. We'd love to hear where you're from and how you heard about today's webinar. All right, we're hearing people from Boston, from Chicago, more people from LA, Phoenix. We really have a whole nationwide audience. I will say one of the greatest parts of these webinars is to be able to connect with women all across the country. So please do use this chat feature throughout today's session. It'll be a great opportunity for you to meet others. If you're someone who the chat is distracting to you, that's fine too. You can also re-click that chat icon and then you won't be able to see it as we go throughout today's session. But for those who like to use it, it's there for your ability throughout today's session. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just want to provide a couple reminders about today's session. One, this session is being recorded, so you will have access to it after the fact. We also have closed captioning available. Again, if you go to the bottom line of your Zoom screen and hit the CC box at the bottom of that screen, you'll be able to select to have closed captions. We also have stream text available separately. We're putting the link for that in the chat, so if you prefer stream text, you can have that as well. You are welcome to use the chat and participate throughout the duration of today's conversation. I encourage you to engage with others or let me know if there's anything that you would like me to cover or questions that you have. We will move to a formal Q&A session when we are joined by Ebony K. Williams, our guest speaker for today. During that time, I do prefer if you use the Q&A box. Again, this is available at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you hit Q&A, you'll be able to submit a question there, and we'll answer that during the Q&A session following my remarks. And finally, at the end of this session, we have a short 3-minute evaluation. We love to hear how this session went for you, if it was valuable, and any feedback you might have so that we can improve in the future. So at the end of this session, we'll provide a link. Also, when you exit the Zoom screen, the link appears automatically. We'd appreciate it if you just take about 3 minutes to complete that evaluation for us. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Jadinette Santos. I am the Political Pipeline Director here at She Should Run. In my role, I oversee our community of more than 21,000 women who are considering the option of running for office for themselves. I also do all of the curriculum and content for webinars like these to provide women with practical skills and leadership skills to be able to confidently consider what running for office might look like for them. At She Should Run, for those of you who may not have heard of us, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit that is working to dramatically increase the number of women who are considering a run for public office. We'll talk a little bit more about our methodology for making that happen in just a second, but I did want to note that women make up slightly more than half of the US population, but we are less than a third of elected leaders at the local, state, and national level. And so getting more women in office is of the utmost importance. There are more than 500,000 offices across the United States. And so we have a vision of seeing 250,000 women running. That equals out to about half of the offices by 2030. You can see this with our hashtag 250K by 2030. So if you're looking for stuff you should run on social media, you can often find us with that hashtag. So I mentioned a little bit of this challenge that women are significantly less likely to run for office. And there's a variety of reasons for that, whether it's we don't feel qualified, or no one's recruited us, or we don't feel like we have the financial capability to do so. But gender parity is fundamental bearing on whether or not economies and societies thrive. And that is shown by the World Economic Forum. And so we have a variety of opportunities for women to engage. We have women across the country from all walks of life, races, ethnicities, sexualities, joining us with She Should Run to tackle the barriers that they see in their path to elected leadership. We do this through data-driven content, education, and collective action. Again, we have a community of more than 21,000 women, all working together and offering support for one another to accomplish this goal. So if you have ever thought about running for office or never thought about running for office, but would like to congregate with women who are in a similar boat as you, we invite you to be a participant in that community. So today we're going to talk specifically about how to stay engaged with news and media during an election season. It is no secret that this is a huge election year, and there are so many things at play as we evaluate news going forward with that. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about how to avoid being overwhelmed by the news, making sure that you don't suffer from fatigue there, how to identify reliable news, establishing a healthy news practice and routine for yourself, engaging with media as a prospective or potential candidate, and finally we'll finish with a conversation with Ebony K. Williams, who is the host and executive producer of Revolt Black News and co-host for State of the Culture. And we're really delighted to have her with us today. I'll do an introduction of her later in today's session. So we're going to start with avoiding news fatigue. During the 2016 election, the majority of Americans who were polled said that they were experiencing some form of exhaustion in relation to news surrounding the presidential election. It is anticipated that in a similar poll starting in September, October of 2020, that we will have a similar reporting. And so what do we do if we want to be engaged citizens who know what's happening in our society, but we don't want to have any extra fatigue? In 2020, we have a pandemic, we have school things happening, we have a variety of things that are demanding attention, and we want to make sure we're engaging in ways that are valuable for us. So I'm going to start with just talking about a few practices that are best known and a little bit helpful to get us started. And the first is to engage with debates closer to the election. Depending on your party, you may have already had a variety of debates to attend throughout the end of last year and the early parts of 2020. And the truth is that you are not required to watch every single debate verbatim with every hour. You can engage with the highlights throughout the season and reserve energy to watch the full debates closer to the election. Similarly, if you don't have the time to dedicate to watching the full debates, transcripts of the debates are readily available at sites like rev.com, allowing you to search through the content using the control find feature and search for the information that is most pertinent to you. Similarly, news sources often do recaps of the greatest highlights, and candidates themselves post highlights of their speeches on their social channels. Recognizing that a debate is a huge chunk of time, and depending on where you live, may not be a convenient time of day for you to engage, and giving yourself the permission to not have to fully engage throughout the entirety of every single debate moving up to the election, and being intentional about the debates that you choose to engage in. The second is polls. Polls can give you a good sense of where the election is at, but a single poll isn't going to tell you anything more than what a specific subset of the population is thinking about at a moment in time. So even though political scientists can't really agree on the bandwagon effect that is said to exist with polls, we do know that polls have a significant bearing on the elections. One of the reasons being, if voters see that a candidate is not performing well in the polls, they might be less likely to engage with that candidate, or sometimes less likely to show up at the polls at all. So making sure that you are being wise about the way that you engage with poll data. One, always try to find out where the poll sources are coming from. Great websites for this are 538 and others who do a quick sampling of the data that they're receiving from the polls. A huge red flag is to avoid graphics only. These are things that we often see on social media and are inflamed with the opinions of many other people. Instead of just relying on a graphic, be sure to go to direct sources, or also to dig deeper into where the polling sample comes from, what it's meant to tell, and the moment of time it is depicting. Polls will be most useful to you if you know what is actually being shared by the data. Next are opinion pieces. So opinion pieces get a lot of flack in terms of staying up to date on news because they are inherently opinion-based versus data-based. But opinions can be really helpful in helping you shape your perspective on a specific issue. So we are all most likely to engage with opinion pieces that match our own political opinions. But recognizing that it's really valuable to read a variety of opinion pieces and get a perspective on where our other family members, friends, or neighbors may differ in opinions from our own. Also, when we read opinion pieces from those who share our same political ideas, it might give extra texture in helping to explain the reason why we believe what we do. Making sure that when we do read opinion pieces, we engage with them as opinion pieces and not as fact. One of the biggest fatigues that we can have in our adult lives, period, is mistaking facts for opinions. But this is especially true in times of political activism, which generally follows around election cycles. So what we are clear when we are reading opinion pieces and what we are reading opinion pieces for. And finally, the greatest way to avoid news fatigue is to be involved at the local level. Obviously, during a presidential election year, there is a lot of attention on the presidential candidates themselves. However, many states will also elect governors and state legislators this November. And so figuring out ways that you can be involved in the local level, whether that's looking at a sample ballot for your area and doing the research on the candidates who are showing up, or attending local events, whether they be in person or virtual, or finding out ways that you can be better involved with the campaigns of people who will more closely serve your community. The way that you can do your research ahead of time is that instead of panicking about what's happening at the polling booth, is that you're prepared and proactive about doing that in advance. You should be well familiar with your ballot, who's on that ballot, and what your voting decisions will be beforehand. Also, in being involved at the local level tends to be much more compassionate. We are much more closely linked to our neighbors or fellow state members than we are to people across the entire nation. And it allows us to engage with greater compassion, which diminishes our feelings of fatigue. So next is to have a daily news routine. So making sure that you're clear with yourself about how much time you're going to dedicate to news consumption. How much time are you going to spend either reading or listening or watching the news? And recognizing that some of us have longer attention spans than others, or some of us just have more time to dedicate than others. Whatever your schedule permits is absolutely fine, as long as you're clear with yourself about what that schedule looks like. Recognizing 2020 is a big year in terms of demands on our schedules. Some of us are now responsible for full-time at-home work while also monitoring and overseeing our children's education. Others of us are trying to find ways to engage with our skills and abilities without going insane, and finding ways to incorporate the news into that can be a little bit daunting. So setting aside time to determine how much you want to participate with news. If that's a minimum of 5 minutes a day, that's fine. If you want to go up to an hour, that's also fine. But just being clear about how much time you will spend and when you will spend it. Making sure that you have a daily news routine ensures that you're up to date on what's happening. And it doesn't have to be super in depth. This can be I'm reading a couple different headlines, or I'm listening to a 5-minute podcast from NPR. But determining what that daily news routine will be and scheduling it is the first step. The second is determining the news sources that you'll engage with. For this point, it's most important to know what issues matter most to you. None of us have the capacity to care the absolute most about every single issue. So if you're someone who cares a lot about immigration and international relations, you might want to choose news sources that focus on foreign policy. Similarly, if you care a lot about public health, you might want to be reading things that are more focused on health policy. Prioritize the issues that are of the most importance and most significance for you, both as a citizen and as a voter, and then deprioritize those that aren't the biggest ticket issues for you. In addition to the types of sources and the material they will contain, think about the medium that you'll be receiving your news from. Are you someone who prefers to listen and radio or podcast is best for you? Or are you going to sit down in the evening and watch the news report? Are you someone who prefers to read and wants a highlight reel or wants to read in depth of the news articles? Go ahead and make a decision about what mediums work best for you and make sure that they're highlighting the issues that are of greatest importance to you. And finally, make sure that you have varied news resources built into your routine. So you want to make sure that you don't simply have one newspaper or one podcast. We recommend having about 5 to 7 sources that vary on their leanings so that you can have a good roundup of what's happening across the board and avoid spending too much time on only one political perspective. One example of this is The Skimm. So The Skimm provides a daily roundup of a variety of news headlines to keep people informed on a day-to-day basis. For the 2020 election, The Skimm has actually put together a new resource specifically for this election season. It's called Skimm 2020. So for the Skimm 2020, they provide state-specific voting rules, they check your registration status, they allow you to request an absentee ballot, and they help you stay informed about the candidates and issues that are going to be most important to you according to your zip code. So we have the link for that in the chat right now if that's something of interest to you. What I love about this resource is that not only is it providing adequate news information, but it's allowing you to engage in the political process at a one-stop shop for that. Recognizing that there are other ways to do this as well. Someone put in the chat just now, vote411.org provides individual ballots by your address. So figuring out the resources that are going to be best for you to be able to be informed about your ballot and what's happening on the issues that you care most about. So next we're going to talk about candidates. So it is 2020 and candidates have websites all of their own. They also tend to have social media platforms that they use to speak directly to the voters. So we're going to start with the candidate website. The most important part of the candidate website is that they have an issues tab. So you can do a variety of things when you visit their website. You can hear their personal story about what motivated them to pursue public office, but you can also get their specific direction and visions for a variety of issues, whether that be public health, whether that be education, whether that be foreign policy, or whatever is most interesting to you, economics, job security. There is generally a tab on each candidate website to talk about the issues and where they stand on those issues. Next is their social media platforms. So again, this is the day-to-day quick updates to see how they're responding, whether that be to crises or just supporting one another as potential candidates. Making sure that you have quick updates allows you to engage with the news without having to go in depth. You can also remind yourself to say, okay, I saw this tweet or I saw this Instagram post that said a little bit about this topic. I want to go ahead and spend a little bit more time investigating this candidate on this issue because of what they said on social media. Because we all generally have a social media routine, baking our access to political candidates into that just makes it a little bit easier for us to consume the information outside of our daily news routine. Next, you want to make sure that you are watching the candidates that you are interested in as they participate in debates. Now, I know I said at the beginning of this that you don't have to watch every single debate, and you can check out the reviews of the debate afterwards. And that remains true. But what you do want to see is, how does this candidate engage in debates? How do they react when someone has a disagreement with them? How do they treat their opponents? This is just a good way to see how the candidate would negotiate or participate with other political officials once they were elected. It gives you a little bit more of a view on how they engage on those stages. Recognizing that debates are in some ways slightly performative, but they do provide access into the operating style of the candidate that you are looking into. All right, so we're gonna keep going with this. Events and personal engagements with the candidates. So events similar to the debates allow you to ask specific questions of the candidates. This is particularly true if you're attending events for a local elected. Because the audiences are so much smaller, you can often ask specific questions to the candidate themselves or develop a personal relationship. Similarly, on the local level, you can do personal engagement by volunteering on a campaign, canvassing, phone banking, etc. Doing this not only gives you access to the candidate in a more intimate way, but also those who are participating with the candidate and may be in job functions closer to theirs. It gives you better access to people who are involved in the political process and can provide more understanding and context for the things that you're hearing in the news. Finding ways to be involved in a personal way can also expand your political literacy and competency if it's something that you would like to pursue in the future. All right, so this is my favorite part of today's webinar, is fact checking. There are lots of ways that we can all be deceived on the internet, and we want to make sure that we are using reliable sources. In a past life, I served as an adjunct professor for university students, and making sure that they were using credible sources was of utmost importance to me, and that remains true when I talk to people about the importance of using credible and reliable sources when doing our political research. So first, using reliable sources. When researching candidates, you want to be sure that you're using scholarly and nonpartisan sources as often as possible. If something seems off, you want to be able to check that source against fact checkers like politifact.org, factcheck.org, so that you can see if what you're reading is actually true. Sources like this take statements from candidates or headlines and determine the validity of those statements in a nonpartisan way. Above all, you want to avoid inflammatory headlines, even if they support your views. You'll likely miss the forest for the trees, and you'll avoid doing research because you feel validated in your personal stance. So when you see inflammatory headlines of any sort, making sure that you're giving a chance to second guess that, to research further, and make sure that what you're reading is accurate. From there, you want to make sure that you're an active listener and researcher. This is specifically true because so few of us are political gurus. We are out there living our lives and doing what we need to, but candidates are often using political rhetoric and are serving in a position where they need to use persuasion and charisma to be able to win votes. But our job as voters is to make sure that we are as educated as possible. So it's important to read between the lines and to ask questions as we're being told things. If there is rhetoric or language being used that you don't understand, recognizing that you have access to search engines or are able to ask questions of people in your lives to get better understanding of what's happening rather than just taking things at face value. When you are listening at debates or events or reading on candidate websites, if there's anything that you don't understand or that you feel is being glossed over in ways that aren't helpful to you, going back to other sources to be able to get better understanding. And the third and most helpful tip I can provide on this is to don't be cynical. Avoiding cynicism is so important. After we read so much information, whether by our choice or others, because we all, again, exist on, not all of us, but most of us exist in social media where information can be blasted at us without our consent, it can be so easy to become disgruntled or upset. And that will keep us from participating and creating the most healthy democracy possible. So maintaining a attitude of willingness to engage and willingness to research is so important. Even if you feel like, I just want to throw in the towel, none of it matters, reminding yourself that there is value and that you are important as a voter and your education as a voter is so important. All right. With fact checking, this is a really helpful resource that I use, and it rates the reliability of news sources based on how factual they are and how biased they are. So the sources that are going to be most valuable are at the highest part of this chart and in the center of this chart. You'll see them identified by that green square. So across the board, the Associated Press and Reuters provide the most reliable news sources. As you'll see tiered out from there, both on the left and the right, we have resources that are less reliable. So in addition to fact checking, we want to make sure that we're pulling from sources that are in middle of the road in terms of their political leanings and put huge emphasis on factual reporting. So again, using things like AP, Reuters, NPR is going to be much more valuable to us than focusing on things like MSNBC or The Examiner that might appease our political leanings, but maybe aren't going to give us the most important facts as we try to engage with the media. So I'm looking at the chat. I don't see too many questions moving in. Again, if you have questions throughout, feel free to put them in the Q&A section or in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and keep going. So focusing on the issues. There is so much that can be said about focusing on the candidate and the personality rather than the issues themselves. The reason why it's so important for us to focus on the issues is because we're not trying to evaluate if the candidate is someone who we would like to hang out with and get a beer with. We're trying to evaluate if they will uphold the stances on political issues that are most important to us. Additionally, when people are focusing on the issues, we have a better understanding of what they will actually accomplish in office rather than a personality contest. This is particularly valuable in terms of women's leadership because women are at the most vulnerability in terms of likability. Because sexism exists, especially in a political arena, voters are more likely to say that they simply don't trust a woman, or I don't like the sound of her voice, or her outfit doesn't seem right. When we're judging candidates on these issues, rather than on how they have stances and commitments to actually deliver on their legislation and governance, we're missing out on an opportunity to have great leaders, and all because we're adhering to sexist standards rather than the standards of the issues. So talking a little bit more about likability and how that impacts the experience of women candidates or candidates at large, recognizing that no candidate is perfect. I talked a little bit earlier about being careful on social media, but this is actually one thing that I found on social media is that's being circulated that is really helpful. And that is to think about a candidate that you are voting for, not as a marriage partner, but more of a public transportation option, that we might not be going to the exact location that you want to go as a voter, but you want to find the candidate who will get you closest there. So again, focusing on the issues at hand rather than persona or personality allows you to make sure that you're getting the governance that you want as a voter. So we're going to finish up before inviting Ebony to speak with us on the importance of engaging with the media as a potential candidate. So I mentioned a little bit earlier that women are at the greatest risk when we judge on terms of likability. A few years ago, She Should Run did a research project called Name It, Change It that really focused on ways that women are critiqued and criticized in the media, whether that be emphasis on their outfits or asking them where their children are, etc. And what was found through this study is that when women would come back to the media and ask why they were being asked these questions, and I'd really like to focus on the issues instead, that when they took the opportunity to stand up for themselves, that they were viewed more favorably by voters, that voters associated their willingness to stand up for themselves as evidence that this candidate would stand up for them and oversee them in their jurisdiction. So recognizing that you have a lot of power if you're considering running for office in how you are presented, determining how you will take control of your perception in the media, and recognizing that there's a variety of ways to be involved with that. We actually have the great luxury of being joined by an expert in this field in particular, Ebony K. Williams. Again, she is the host and executive producer of Revolt Black News and co-host for State of the Culture. And this is her bread and butter. So we're going to invite Ebony to join us, and we'll start by having her share a little bit about herself and then move into some questions. If you have questions throughout, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. So I'll hand it to you, Ebony.
Thank you, Jaronette. Listen, good afternoon, ladies. I am thrilled to join you and have a really important discussion and an incredibly important moment, of course. So, as Jaronette said, I am a bit of an expert on these things. I even wrote a book about it called Pretty Powerful: Appearance, Substance, and Success, because the reality is, for women in this country and really the world, what we look like, for better or for worse, does matter. And it directly impacts, and when I say look, really, all of it, the mannerisms, how we carry ourselves, how we show up in spaces, right? Our presentation has a profound effect on our ability to be successful professionally and politically, which of course is what we're talking about. So to that means my background started in law. I am a recovering attorney. Criminal justice was my specialty. And I really loved the law, and I still love the law, but I felt there was a need to get the messaging that was most important to me around social justice issues and aspects of criminal justice more broadly projected. And so I decided to leave the courtroom after several years of practicing as a public defender and a private defense lawyer and go into national broadcasting. I moved to Los Angeles in 2010, started a career in talk radio, actually, and then found my way to television. I've worked for various news outlets, HLN, CNN, CBS News, Fox News Channel. I've also dabbled in some other areas of sports commentary as well. But right now, I am proudly hosting and executively producing for Revolt TV, and my show is called Revolt Black News because our network's founder, Mr. Sean Combs, Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, whatever folks are calling him in this generation, he decided that there was a glaring and very obvious need for a news product that was unapologetically about the Black perspective and Black lens and Black culture. And I proudly took on that work. So each week, that's what we do. We offer news and analysis around all of the issues tackling our country and our world, but with that unapologetic Black viewpoint. So with that, I also write for Forbes and Forbes Women in particular. I'm a contributor there, and I am a newly named special correspondent for Essence Magazine, where Black women come first. So glad to be with you all.
Yeah, and thank you. You have such an extraordinary career and so much courage and bravery in that, navigating from your time as a lawyer, moving into various news outlets. And I'm just so impressed with what you've been able to accomplish. So excited to be able to have you here with us today. We have a few questions that were shared with us during the registration process of people who are here. And so also we'll have people participating live through the Q&A. The question that stuck out as where we wanted to start is how can I get started building my brand as a leader in politics before I run for office?
Very important question. And I'm glad we're starting here because I think it's the foundational point from which all the other tentacles can live. So I remember back when I was first deciding to make the transition from practicing law to being a broadcaster, but really what that is, which is what everybody on this call wants to do, is really be a part of either the local and or national conversation as it relates to community. That's really what we're talking about. So I was really scared because I was very concerned what will people say? Will they think I'm credible enough? Will they think I'm an expert enough? Will they think I'm experienced enough? You know, I started this work over 10 years ago, so a little bit younger than I am today. And I was nervous about that. Am I going to deal with pushback because I'm a Black woman? Am I going to deal with pushback because I'm from the South and have a little twang in my voice, you know, and say y'all a whole lot? But eventually I realized that, as Oprah Winfrey always says, nobody can beat you being you. And that unique gift is the thing that is most needed. Your voice and how you show up in the world is your superpower. And excuse me one second. Okay, had to get that together. Okay, yeah, that's your superpower. And so what I did was I got real comfortable with myself first before I started making my voice and my thoughts public. And so I would recommend that every woman that's really thinking about running for office or engaging in the public sphere in this way really spend some time. And it's going to be an evolving thing. It's not one day you wake up and you're 1,000% comfortable, right? But really giving yourself permission to feel the way you feel. Whether, you know, I'm not a partisan person either, so working with She Should Run is a real nice treat for me. So whatever your quote politics, your conservatism, your liberalism, your libertarianism, or whatever your in-betweenism is, get comfortable in that. And because I will tell you this, once you go into the public sphere, you're going to get all kinds of energy forces that are trying to sway you one way or another and make you other than your authentic self. So the first thing I would say is get real comfortable with who you are before you enter the publicness of it. The second thing is you got to start somewhere. There's no right time. There's no perfect time. There's no perfect platform even. So whether it's television, radio, print, I think print's always a really nice way for most people to start. So just kind of writing, whether it's a Facebook post, you'd be surprised, even that. Sometimes a simple Facebook post, sometimes a simple tweet. That's where I tested my waters, you know, just let me throw out a tweet that says it was in the wake of Trayvon Martin's brutal killing back in 2013. And there was a conversation at the time in the ethos about hoodies being problematic on young Black boys, and that, you know, Trayvon was killed because he was wearing a hoodie, and as if that was okay. And so I said, to say Trayvon Martin or any other young Black boy is responsible for their own murder because they wore a hoodie is to say that a woman is responsible for her own rape because she wore a miniskirt. So there is no uniform or permission slip for those types of crimes. And it was, you know, it was mixed received, as most things are in this space, but it allowed me to kind of get my feet wet and get used to people being extremely positive in the reaction and very negative. And that's going to come with the territory. So I think writing blog posts, writing LinkedIn posts, writing eventually from there, once you get used to it and you start finding your way, you know, maybe you start writing for a couple of online outlets. You know, The Hill is always looking for new writers. Essence Magazine, of course, that I write for is a fantastic. There's a lot of places. So I think starting with that. Similarly in broadcast. So everybody has a podcast now. So that's a good thing in the sense that there's a lot of opportunity to create content. And before you go on NPR or PBS or, you know, ABC News or some major outlet, you can hone your skill set and your voice and your message and all of those things on, you know, quieter platforms, as we say. You know, if your best friend has a podcast, get on it. You know, if your cousin, neighbor, or brother has a little podcast or a little radio show, test it out. Also now, same thing with kind of visual broadcasts, so to speak. There's so much digital content. A lot of people have webinars, web shows, different things like that. Just start doing it. That's the best advice I can say.
Yeah, I love that. And I like that you shared that this is when you got your feet wet using Twitter, that you got familiar with, okay, now there's going to be a lot of positive response, but also maybe there's going to be those detractors or people who maybe disagree with you. And that was a concern that one person shared of how do you manage misinformation, intentional misinformation about you, whether that be on social media or print media? What do you do to respond in those situations?
Yes, this is extremely important because it's very prevalent. It's pervasive. Even, you know, before I had a more public platform as I do now, everybody's kind of got a platform now because of social media. Every single individual is somewhat of a brand. There's mixed reaction to this, Janet, but for me, I never let something that is truly egregious go unchallenged, because some of the things I've learned from watching and being a student of politics all my life is, if you don't define yourself, other people will. So in the political capacity, if you don't define yourself, the opposing candidate, your opponent, will define you for you. And that's real dangerous. We've seen everybody from Dukakis to Mitt Romney fall victim to that. And so it's extremely important that even if you're running just, a local school board race or something like that, you have to fully define yourself for the constituency, for the public sphere. Do not assume people are going to read your bio. Don't assume anyone's going to read your resume. Don't assume that people are going to know who you are or what your story is. You need to be constantly telling your story all the time. I have a very dear friend and also a sorority sister who was running for the United States Senate in a primary last year. And she was, used to local races. She was a former sitting councilwoman. And, this was her first soiree in national media. And the thing I told her was, you have to remember that when people are consuming content, whether that's listening to radio or watching television or watching something digitally, they normally do it in intervals of 2 to 3 minutes, sometimes less than that. So never feel, well, I already said that I was a single mom, or I already said that I was, first generation college graduate, or well, I already said that, I'm a product of divorce, whatever it is. I already said that I beat cancer 3 times. Say it 1,000,000 times. Again, I've been doing this for 10 years and, I tell my story everywhere I go, because it's important to never take for granted that people's ability to connect with you, which is what all of this is about, right? And they're always finding those opportunities that are in your story. So the minute you stop telling your story and you stop being in control of your personal narrative, you allow for those vulnerabilities, Jaronette, for your opponent or other people to start defining you. And then you've got to do a lot of cleanup job. It's a lot easier to get in front of it by constantly telling your own story.
I think that is so wise. And for those of you who might be curious about how do I get started telling my own story, at She Should Run in our incubator, we provide a lot of helpful guidance for how to get started telling your own story. And I completely agree with you, Ebony, being able to come back to that foundation of who you are. And like you mentioned in your response to the first question, that foundation of being comfortable with yourself and knowing that story and honoring that becomes true in how you move forward with every response. This is somewhat similar. You can tell that as the participants have a lot of anxiety around what does it mean to engage with media. I've heard from a variety of different things we've hosted with She Should Run that one of the barriers that women feel is keeping them from considering running for office is this idea that I don't have thick skin. I just don't think I can hack it. And when it comes terms to engaging with media, the question is, how do I avoid being emotionally triggered or emotionally responding when I see things that either I really care about and I'm passionate about, or things that are with or against me? What do I do to make sure I'm giving a leveled response to those things?
Easier said than done. So I'll start with that. We're all human beings. So when somebody is saying something that is personally kind of against you or with that intentionality there, that's very difficult. But a couple of things I would offer that can be helpful. Number one, maintain perspective. The minute they started selling soap during the 6:30 evening news, the news became a product, okay? The news is for sale. And that's, to me, to the detriment of our nation and our democracy. But it is what it is, as Michelle Obama says. So the reality is they are, meaning newscasters and everybody else that works professionally in the news sector, where a lot of this, content is being held, they are there to also be a part of a ratings machine. So, sweet, soft stories and sweet depictions of individuals and everybody getting along all the time doesn't always rate. That's the reality. So ratings are often driven by conflict and by, if it bleeds, it leads, so to speak. So just keep in mind that some of what is happening in the political sphere and in news spaces, it ain't about you, basically. It's really about them creating the content that they feel they need to maximize viewership. So just try to keep that in the back of your head so that you don't take it so personally. Even though it's got your name on it, my therapist says this, it might have your name on it, but that doesn't mean it's about you.
No, absolutely. We're kind of winding down with our last couple of questions. If anyone has something really pressing, go ahead and put that in the Q&A box. The question I wanted to ask, and you referenced this briefly in your introduction, you wrote the book Pretty Powerful, and I know you have a background in pageantry. You have this exquisite ability to marry feeling really comfortable and strong with your own capabilities, intelligence, but also recognizing that I'm competing in a market that demands my best fit forward. How do you bring these things together, and what advice would you have for women who are looking to do the same?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jarna. It's very kind of you to say, and I received that. And it's not as natural as people think. That's the first thing I would say. I think I get a lot of commentary, especially at this point in my career and in my journey of, oh, it's so natural. What a gift you have. And, you know, some of that may be true, and I'll honor that and receive that. But a lot of this, Jarna, it's work. It is doing the work. It has been doing the work in one way, form, or another for 20 years. You know, whether that was, you know, understanding in policy and litigation as a young person, whether that was practicing law and implementing it in the courtroom and beyond, whether it was, you know, starting my broadcasting career some 12 years ago and just doing any old, back when Puff Post Live was doing free stuff back, you know, 10 years ago. And it's building on that. So the woman that's presenting, you know, here today with you, and yeah, I would say at almost 37, I am quite comfortable with who I am, and I'm good with however anybody feels about it. That wasn't true even 3 years ago, you know? So it comes with the territory. I would tell any woman who's concerned about that, nervous about that, her ability to, as you say, have tough skin or deal with the chaos and the noise that comes with entering the public sector, to give herself grace, give yourself literal permission and time to adjust to this thing. Because we are of a generation where this thing is changing right before our very eyes. You know, there was not so long ago where a candidate was primarily only on display during, you know, funded commercial ads and a handful of debates. That's no longer the case. Candidates at all levels, local, state, federal, and beyond, are constantly under scrutiny, constantly being looked at, picked apart, assessed, and to embrace it. Don't fight it. Don't fight it. It's a fight and a losing battle. This is the world we live in, and it will only get more consuming. So as soon as you can, as quickly as you can, and as responsibly as you can, get real okay with yourself. Give yourself a lot of grace. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself permission. Do not hold yourself to a standard of doing this thing called being a civic participant in our democracy. You don't feel like you have to do it like anybody else. Don't spend your time trying to emulate whoever, you know, Nikki Haley or Michelle Obama. You know, kill that right now. There's one Barack Obama, there's one Michelle Obama, there's one, you know, Nikki Haley. Let it go. Give yourself permission to be you and get comfortable as you go on the journey.
Absolutely. I love that. And I truly believe that we are all most successful when we focus on being the best version of ourselves. And like you said, doing the work. So the final question I'll ask, just a little bit in line, I think that you are able to provide a unique perspective as someone who is so personally entrenched in the media, helps deliver news and media. What would you say is the most important thing women are doing if they are not quite the candidate themselves, but looking to evaluate all of the media coming their way to make sure that they feel comfortable with candidates that they're evaluating to vote for? Any tips or tricks that you would say to look out for as they're consumers in addition to looking to put themselves forward?
Yeah, I mean, again, as consumers, you know, you have to be extremely savvy this day and age because there's so much content. Again, there was a time where you're only getting news from a handful of channels. Now, everybody's got a news channel, everybody's got a cable channel, everybody's got a podcast, everybody's got an op-ed. I think you gave some great points earlier on in this webinar about how to be selective, you know, use credible and reliable sourcing as best you can. And then the rest of it is you got to trust yourself and trust your own instincts and really decipher and comb through the landscape. And, you know, if it seems suspicious to you or skeptical, do that extra legwork to vet the source. Don't just believe something, you know, you heard on somebody's show. You know, investigate that. Okay, they said this was the, you know, conviction rate of so-and-so. Well, a lot of this stuff is public record. We can look into that if we so choose. So I would ask people to trust their instincts, do the extra legwork to avail yourself to a lot of factual information that is available because we've got this great thing called Google, and operate with your own personal level of integrity. If it doesn't sound good, sounds too good to be true, probably is.
Excellent. That was going to be my last question, but actually just received one that was so great. And I will just address one thing because I've gotten like 17 requests for this. When I was talking about the news source that compiles it all for you, provides state information, et cetera, that is Skim 2020 that is providing that source. I know several of you are asking about that. I'll come back to it at the end as well. But Ebony, the question for you that I think is really valuable, was asked, let's say I've been putting myself in the spotlight, but as issues are coming forward, I've actually changed my position on something. I've received new information and I'm adjusting the way that I'm responding. How can I address that publicly in a way that maintains my integrity after I've already established a persona for myself in the media?
How to not look like a flip-flopper. Great question. So, got to tell the truth. Got to be vulnerable, got to own your shit, right? And the more plain you say it and the more authentically you lean into your original position, and then you have to really, this is where you have to have some humility, Jaronette. You can't just say, you know, I was pro Medicare for all, but then I've done further research and now I am, for healthcare choice. That's not enough for people to trust an authentic evolution of position. So what you have to do is break it down for people. I had this position, I had it from, this amount of time, and here's why I felt that way. Now, let me tell you what I have either learned or been educated on or personally experienced, and walk people through that so that they really can, maybe even they don't agree with your evolution, but they can see your process. It's like, let's go back to 4th grade math, show your work. You can't just erase your answer and show a new answer. You probably cheated, right? So that's why they make you show your work. Same thing in politics. Show your work, cite your sources, cite your experiences, cite all the different specifics that contributed to your evolved position on an issue or a law or a candidate.
Excellent, Ebony. Thank you so much. Thank you for spending, I know that your time is precious and we are so grateful to have had you with us today. Thank you for responding to these questions. Thank you for the work that you've done and the example that you can be, at least to me, and I'm sure to all the other women here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, dear. And I just want to say this was a real treat. And, I'm happy to be introduced to the tremendous work of She Should Run by my lifetime best friend and also peer mentor, Christina Jackson Scott. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ebony. All right. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. So a couple other things I've been asked about the Skim 2020. Sorry, I don't know why it muted me. I've been asked about the Skim 2020 election tool, so that is listed in the link, as well as the AdFonts Media. If you go to AdFonts Media, that's the one that rates the reliability and neutrality of different news sources, both tools that can help you to stay informed this election season. If you enjoyed what you heard today, we hope that you'll get involved in our community. Again, this is more than 21,000 women who are engaging to build their leadership and consider running for office. Second, if there's just 3-minute quick evaluation that we would love to be able to hear your feedback on what worked well for you this session, as well as provide more information for future sessions. Finally, we are able to make webinars like this happen because of generous sponsorship. This webinar was sponsored by Youth to the People. Youth to the People makes vegan skincare for all skin tones, all passions, all people. Using their platforms, they will be activating the vote this November 3rd by amplifying key dates, historic moments, and important facts about the complex voting process. And we're so grateful that they chose to partner with She Should Run to get people to the polls this November. In addition to formal sponsorship, webinars like this are possible because of generous donations from participants like you. For those of you who contributed as you registered today, thank you so much for making this possible and for making it possible for us to deliver on our mission of getting more women to consider running for office. If you liked what you saw today and would like to contribute, please check us out. The link for donation is also available in the chat. If you have other questions, feel free to reach out to us at She Should Run at any time. Thank you for dedicating the time to be here this afternoon, and we hope you have a great day.